Good morning. I'm Adam Stern, Executive Director of Offshore Wind California, a business group representing developers, technology companies, and consulting firms. Welcome to our webinar on what President-elect Biden's victory means for offshore wind in California. As a sign of growing interest in the California market, 375 people have registered for this call. Our audience comes from California and throughout North America and Europe. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Offshore Wind California website within a few days. We've disabled the chat for general use, but you can use it to reach our tech team in case you have any technical problems. If you wish to ask questions of our speakers, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. With the Biden administration preparing to take office, many analysts expect to see major progress in developing offshore wind in California and other federal coastal waters. A key step in California will be for federal and state agencies to agree on sufficient sea space for offshore wind within the call areas designated by the Federal Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Among today's key questions is whether new political leadership at the Departments of Interior and Defense will help resolve ocean use conflicts so that offshore wind lease auctions can proceed in California. The industry's goal is for there to be auctions off the north and central coasts of California in 2021. Meanwhile, California is still emerging from the worst fire season in its history. The fires have created new urgency to accelerate the state's path to meet its clean energy and climate goals. Fortunately, offshore wind can complement the existing supply of solar and land-based wind, help balance the grid, and provide a major boost to the state's economy. Governor Newsom, the legislature, and state agencies could enact policies to include offshore wind in California's renewable energy modeling and electricity transmission plans. Our audience wants to know, now that the state will have a cooperative federal partner, will California's leaders seize the moment and move offshore wind forward? And more specifically, will the state ask the Biden administration to help advance offshore wind for California? For today's panel, please welcome Dan Riker, co-chair of Clean Energy for Biden and senior research scholar of the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. Dan previously served as Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy in the Clinton administration. Vice Admiral retired Dennis McGinn of the United States Navy. Vice Admiral McGinn was Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy Installations and the Environment in the Obama administration. Kelly Boyd, Strategic Advisor for ARC Strategies and Offshore Wind California. In earlier posts, she was Senior Policy Advisor for the California Public Utilities Commission and Director of State Public Affairs for Southern California Edison. And Tom Soto, Managing Director of the Diverse Communities Impact Fund. Tom served on the transition team for President Obama's Council on Environmental Quality. I've asked each of the panelists to give opening remarks for about 5 minutes each. Then I'll follow up with a round of questions focused on their areas of expertise and stimulate discussion. After that, we'll take questions from the audience. So to begin, let's start with Dan Riker, co-chair of Clean Energy for Biden.
Good morning, good afternoon all, and thanks Adam for organizing a great panel with some great friends at what I'd have to say is a rather key moment. The panel's question is, what does Biden's win mean for offshore wind? And I'm pleased to give you some thoughts, but before I do that, I should answer two preliminary questions. First, my connection to President-elect Biden, and second, my connection to offshore wind. On the first, I've had the honor of serving 3 presidents and on 2 transition teams, including for the Obama-Biden administration. I was also a founder and a national co-chair of an affinity group that Adam mentioned called Clean Energy for Biden, or CE4B, now 13,000 strong. We launched CE4B and an event with Vice President Biden on Earth Day. We've raised more than $3 million and submitted a 400-page policy report to the transition team, including recommendations on offshore wind. In terms of my connections to offshore wind, at Google, where I worked for several years, in the mid-2000s, we invested in the Atlantic Wind Connection, a proposed undersea transmission line from northern New Jersey to southern Virginia to serve offshore wind projects. And in 2014, I became a senior advisor to Magellan Wind, founded by Jim Leonard and Jeff Keeney. We brought the concept of offshore wind to California, emphasizing that the state had an amazing resource off its coast and that floating technology was on its way to take advantage of that resource. In my Magellan mode, I made two personal pitches to Governor Brown on the extraordinary opportunities of California offshore wind, one on a return trip from the Paris climate talks. The governor was a strong supporter of the concept. So getting to today's question again, what does Biden's win mean for offshore wind in California? There are actually several Joe Bidens, and you have to go back pretty far to describe his important connection to offshore wind. First, there is Senator Biden, who, according to my colleague, Jim Leonard, may be the first senator in history to back a US offshore wind project with his outreach more than a decade ago to key federal agencies in support of the Blue Water Wind Project in Delaware. Interestingly, Senator Biden's chief of staff back then, Ted Kaufman, was also an early supporter. And fast forward, he took Mr. Biden's Senate seat and today actually chairs the Biden transition team. Second, there is Vice President Biden. The Obama-Biden White House did an important job encouraging the Department of Defense and the Department of Interior to settle their differences over offshore wind development off the Virginia coast. There is now agreed upon space for 5.2 gigawatts of offshore wind off Virginia, with national security, commercial fishing, and clean energy interests respected in the process. Third, there is presidential candidate Biden, who announced a comprehensive and far-reaching climate and energy plan. A few key features. First, a zero carbon electric grid by 2035, advanced by a federal clean energy standard. Second, $2 trillion in clean energy and sustainability related funding over President Biden's first term. Third, a major commitment to energy technology innovation and related funding, so important for an industry like ours that will be deploying innovative floating offshore technologies and related infrastructure. Fourth, there is President-elect Biden. Most importantly, the president-elect is beginning to field a strong clean energy and climate team, starting with John Kerry as the new climate envoy and the first ever member of the National Security Council with a climate mandate. I would note that Mr. Kerry, as a Massachusetts senator, was an early and solid supporter of the Cape Wind offshore wind project. We also have recent nominees for Secretary of State, that's Tony Blinken, and UN Ambassador, that's Linda Thomas Greenfield, with solid climate credentials. As Gina McCarthy, the head of NRDC and a former EPA administrator herself, said recently about these nominees, this marks a clear return to US climate leadership at home and abroad. It puts effective climate action at the top of the agenda. Importantly, I'm confident that President-elect Biden will also select 3 additional secretaries of Defense, Interior, and the Navy who will get on with the critical task of working out their differences so we can get to a California lease sale, and soon. I take comfort in the words of a former chief of naval operations who told Jim Leonard, Jeff Keeney, and me that while the Central California coast is a critical area for the Navy, there was no doubt in his mind that offshore wind can be compatible through an appropriate carve-out. As I noted, the Obama-Biden administration reached a carve-out agreement with the Navy in Virginia, and we believe the Biden-Harris administration can do the same in California. Finally, there is President Biden, 2 wonderful sounding words, who I think will do much to advance key equities in large-scale development of California offshore wind, including environmental justice, tribal interests, and commercial fishing. The good news is that Mr. Biden's plan really emphasizes the profound importance of dealing upfront and forthrightly with disadvantaged urban and rural communities, Native American nations, people of color, unions, and others, so that projects can proceed with broad stakeholder support and not face major barriers on the development path. I also think the new president and vice president will importantly seek to build a strong relationship with Governor Newsom and his team. From the California side, it is important that the governor prioritize California offshore wind from a climate and competitiveness perspective. From the governor on down, California needs to signal its strong support for near-term development of offshore wind, and the sooner the better. The incoming Biden administration is already being flooded with opportunities and challenges from each of the 50 states, and California, if it is serious about building an offshore wind industry, should send a signal soon about its interest in getting projects built. The good news is that there is actually a win-win opportunity here. California, with a more than $50 billion deficit, could use some stimulus funding from Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, an expedited California offshore wind lease sale with federal revenues on the order of $500 million could help prime the stimulus pump for the Golden State. I would note that California offshore wind is also a great jumping off point for far more projects in deep water around the Pacific Rim. Bottom line, there are several Joe Bidens, senator, vice president, presidential candidate, president-elect, and president, and they will bring together the expertise, commitment, and resources that it will take to finally launch a California offshore wind industry, including, I am hopeful, a lease sale in 2021, so vital to progress. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to one of the most talented people in our industry and a good friend and colleague, Admiral Denny McGinn. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dan. And let me start by agreeing wholeheartedly with Dan's point about it is possible to have compatibility between Department of Defense operations, training and testing and operations off the coast of California and a viable, economically productive offshore wind industry. I say this from the position of having been on active duty stationed in California for 22 of the 35 years I spent in uniform. And in those 22 years, I got to know California pretty well, offshore in particular. I started out as a young Navy aviator based in the Central Valley, flying out of Lemoore, flying over the waters that would soon host, within the next 10 years, offshore wind farms. And progressing through my career, I had the opportunity to command ships, one based in the Bay Area, another in San Diego, an aircraft carrier. I have plied these waters, flown over them, rode on submarines under them, and I am absolutely convinced, especially as a result of my capstone operational assignment as the commander of the United States Third Fleet, that this is doable. We have been talking for years with the United States Navy in particular, but other services as well about this, and I see some progress being slowly but surely made. I believe, as Dan pointed out, that the impetus will increase with President Biden and, oh, by the way, Vice President Harris, a California native last time I checked, and the benefits to so many stakeholders are there. It isn't a zero-sum game when you think it's either wind or it's defense. It is compatibility that we are going to be able to achieve. And in fact, there are actual realistic operational benefits of putting offshore wind in the state of, or off the state of California, because it's happening all over the Pacific, indeed all over the world. And it will be the environment in which our armed forces will be operating for many, many decades to come. A last point I'd like to make is a sense of urgency to get this thing going. Let's get the permitting done. Let's get the lease sales. Let's get steel in the water, because California needs it. It needs it for the economic reasons that Dan outlined. But think about the past summer. Climate change and Mother Nature are not going to go away anytime soon. No one can say with any bit of assurance that, oh, there won't be another big heat wave next summer or the summer after that, and on and on and on. There will be. And California needs the capacity and the diversity that offshore wind at the 10 gigawatt scale can provide. In 2025, it's scheduled to shut down a major clean energy source in Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. That power has to be replaced, and it has to be augmented in a clean way with offshore wind, which, oh, by the way, is a great complement to terrestrial wind and solar and other forms of clean energy as a firming factor for consistent generation and consistent meeting of all energy demands. So California has an urgent need, our country has an urgent need, and we can do this in a compatible way with our armed forces. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Admiral McGinn. And now to Kelly Boyd.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to kind of frame this in how the federal changes are going to impact what's going on in California and our current political environment. We are at an interesting point. We're midterm in the governor's term. So he is moving from governing into campaigning, which is an important watermark here. Very similar to where Governor Davis was in 2000 when we had our energy crisis. While Governor Davis got reelected in 2002, he was recalled. We have long memories in California. Economic issues are very important to us. So all of those things are being considered by a governor who's facing unprecedented crises across the state. The COVID situation, the economic crisis, we have an unemployment crisis in California, not just with people being unemployed, but with how we're managing it. Our state legislature, which is strongly favorable to continued growth of clean energy, renewables. The governor issued an executive order back in September, escalating the move to transportation electrification. That will increase demand. A couple of things that were brought out previously are how we're going to address all of this. Offshore wind is a terrific matching resource to California's energy needs. As we close Diablo, which is coastal, as we begin to close gas plants, we need to backfill for reliability. The other thing that's happening in California right now that mirrors what happened in our prior energy crisis are issues with reliability. We had outages not related to wildfires over the summer. We had a major legislative hearing in the fall about those outages, and reliability, the diversity of our energy resources and our ability to deliver them, what our infrastructure is capable, all came out as issues that need to be resolved. Offshore wind is a perfect fit as part of the solution for that. So in looking at the shift to President Biden and again, Kamala Harris serving as vice president, there's a lot of folks that are in our existing administration that are serving in government here in California who may move on to Washington. There are already changes. Again, we're in a midterm with the governor's office. We have folks that have already left the governor's office to take other posts here in the state, but we may see others who move on federally. That's going to change our landscape a little bit. And I know as we were speaking earlier also about competing interests. This ability to negotiate with federal entities is critical going forward. We need to improve that situation. The expectation is that it will be improved, but California is progressive. It's really pushed the envelope on clean energy, emission reductions, all of these things, but it's facing an affordability and reliability crisis. So my sense is that resources like offshore wind, which are a little bit more expensive at the gate, but are going to prove to be much more high value, they're higher capacity. Our legislature's already responded favorably to that. Governor Newsom, going back to when he was the mayor of San Francisco, has been an advocate for offshore wind. We just haven't seen the movement we'd like to see. I think that's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. I think that movement is going to take place between what's going on in the federal government and what's going on in California. We have a lot of other crises to manage here. So ensuring that we keep offshore wind at the forefront is, I think, going to be a large task. We're compatible with solar, we're compatible with storage. We help diversify the portfolio. We address reliability. I think the biggest issue for offshore wind is the job creation. California will be losing, when Diablo closes, a lot of great jobs. As the gas plants close, they'll lose a lot of great jobs. Offshore wind and the supply chain that goes with it are great replacements for that. In a progressive state like this, where we've lost a lot of jobs and where we need to bring in revenue, including tax revenue, those are the sort of issues that are going to resonate with our incoming legislature and with Governor Newsom's office. Again, I think it's really important to keep in mind the governor is already running for 2022, and he needs to ensure that the steps that he takes are solid. He needs to ensure that his relationship with federal agencies remains solid. He has to contend with environmental tensions between terrestrial and marine resources, and among marine resources, not just environmental concerns, but commercial concerns with fisheries. And I think what was pointed out previously by the Admiral is that compatible interests, compatible uses are absolutely not just possible, but they're going to bring great benefit to California. Floating platforms 20 to 25 miles offshore is good coastally for this state. We guard our coast like it was a baby. And it's very hard to do coastal development here, but that is, I think, the biggest benefit of offshore wind. We tried to do liquefied natural gas on floating platforms before, and it wasn't a sell. This is a very different resource and a very different time. And I think those types of things are going to be, they're going to resonate. We have what we call a double supermajority in our Assembly and our Senate. A significant number of Democrats. We have a Democratic governor. We have a lot of state agencies that have been slow to move, and we need those folks to move those agencies. I think the governor needs, in the coming year and a half before his reelection is up, he needs to demonstrate.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Get things done. And I think he also needs to demonstrate a competency. Thanks. So I just want to close by saying, I think that all of those things are going to be beneficial to offshore wind.
Thank you, Kelly. And now to Tom Soto.
Adam, thanks. This is a really wonderful panel. It's so nice to see folks that, we're all long-term veterans of this conversation, and some of us had much more hair back then. More fluffy hair too. There's a lot to say, look forward to. I mean, Adam, you know me pretty well. I'm a forever optimist within this sector. And, like Dan, I've had some proximity to this president and president-elect and so forth. And in fact, Dan and I were neighbors on the 8th floor at 6th and E Street during the transition period for Obama in 08 and 09. And we thought that we had it bad then. I mean, we were looking at, and Dan will recall how we would have these meetings on Thursday during the transition, and Gene Sperling would get up and say, we've lost another 650,000 jobs. What are we doing to cure this? And if you remember, we took the first half of the TARP, which was $1 trillion, and we had the investment tax credits, a huge number of tax credits that were being sunset at the time, that December 31st. But we had the cooperation of a Republican Congress and a Republican president who helped us to get that passed. And then it was a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president to get the other half of the TARP later on after the swearing in. And, it was because of the style of leadership that we had as a result, not entirely because of President Obama at the time or President-elect, but because Joe Biden, clearly had the capacity to exercise 30 years of history within the Senate to get those votes and to challenge both houses to bring the American people first. We're very much in a similar era. When we were forming things, Dan mentioned the Clean Energy for Biden, of which he's one of the co-chairs. I sit on the executive council. And it was an incredibly high velocity scale when that was announced, because everyone just wanted to jump on board and do what could happen, make things happen as we were moving forward just in the campaign. And that has since turned out to become and blossom into this huge opportunity, now not just for helping Biden get to the White House, but now providing counsel and support on a regulatory basis that could be given to the transition team. And then Mr. Biden, of course, came out in 2015, November, when we asked him at LA Clean Tech Incubator to come and basically cut the ribbon on our new facility. And he led a conversation, Kelly, you might remember that, on climate change and job creation. So all of that said, we're at a point where, interestingly enough, as many of the factors in this equation, Adam, that you highlighted, and Danny and Dan and Kelly, it is a point in time that we've never seen before. What this governor is going through and the type of leadership that he needs to provide, and nothing short of just biblical epics occurring all around him. It's like a Cecil B. DeMille movie. I'm waiting for frogs to come out of the sky. And
we're hoping that wind turbines can kill locusts.
Exactly. but there's no, President Clinton used to say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And here is an opportunity where we could take a lot of the pent up energy, no pun intended, that has been built up as a result of poor leadership or lack of leadership within this area. And praise the universe that we've had leadership here in California to maintain the level of sincerity and intent with respect to responding to climate change. It is very similar to what happened in Kyoto when Vice President arrived and it was basically dead to the US. But within 2 to 3 years, we had 184 cities, 34 states supporting Kyoto, and that gave us the foundation for AB 32. Same was true with when Trump came into office. We continued to move forward with our agenda with respect to making as much activity occur within California to assure responding to climate change. And folks like Carb and Mary Nichols providing not just national leadership, but global leadership to assure that our presence was being felt on the global stage from the technology point of view, the policy response that is needed, as well as assuring the investment community that this is where the future still lays. We at the New Energy Nexus, for example, which has its hands in many things here in California, we look at offshore wind as one of the primary components, for example, for continuing to build out different phases of optionality within the blend of energy that we have, which is wind, solar, storage. And as we move through, as Kelly had mentioned, a full decarbonization, there's going to be an entire shift to job and employment demands that occur. But there's also going to be an increase in the demand of other alternatives. For example, the promotion of Lithium Valley in Imperial Valley. We're sitting on the Saudi Arabia of lithium out at the Salton Sea. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be developing that to support the efforts of offshore wind, because that wind is going to go to storage, and that will help to close the optional gaps that are present within the current system. And this is where, we have a painful relationship with natural gas in California that will probably become less so as we move forward. But that will only occur if we're able to rely on much greater reliability with respect to storage, as well as having the capacity to build offshore wind. And then we're looking at it through this filter that I don't think anyone on this call has experienced before. We're sitting at the dovetail or the intersection, of climate crisis and climate justice, BLM, diversity and inclusion, a new administration, and then hopefully what we find is the end of an era of divisiveness and exclusion. All of these factors you cannot underestimate have a wearing effect on this conversation, because it really takes the focus away from the elected community from what really needs to happen, which is essentially the cooking of planet Earth down to the communities. And we're talking about a state here in California where 30% of our population are Latino. A good portion of our state legislative process is driven by the Latino Legislative Caucus. and there is a clear demand from the caucus and from the Latino community to move forward on addressing climate change. There's no doubt that Kevin De Leon and the leadership that he provided, and prior to that, Antonio Villaraigosa and so forth, all have had an effect. And now we have a speaker with Anthony Rendon. We still have continued leadership with the Latino caucus to assure that those jobs that are created, I mean, 10 megawatts, that's probably 40 or $50 billion of return for the state of California just on offshore wind. And it's probably in the realm of 14 to 16,000 jobs that could be created between now and the next 15 to 20 years. That's a significant effect when you're talking about high wage, high skill labor opportunities in California in an era where we're headed from a $26 billion reserve to potentially a $52 billion deficit. And these are the questions that Governor Newsom has to ask himself is, this is probably the biggest, most single shovel-ready project that we could put our nose to the grindstone on. And my hope is that we're going to see more folks, move to Washington, just like in the Clinton years. It was a wholesale lift of Californians to the White House, and then again with the Obama years. We hope to see that again occur. I think the quickest thing that we could do to get this off the tab is get Dan Riker back to Washington. So,
Tom, I was thinking, and as a registered optimist myself, along with you, as you listed all of those daunting challenges, I think about them as the wrapping paper that surrounds wonderful opportunities. I mean, this is there's nothing like invention or necessity being the mother of invention. And these challenges are going to drive us to great opportunities to increase quality of life, to increase our economic viability, our environmental quality, and of course our energy security. So it's an exciting time.
And this is not for lack of the spirited conversation around the country, but at the end of the day, we are California. This is what we do. Yeah. It's Silicon Valley, it's Silicon Beach, it's Hollywood, it's aerospace. I mean, look at the vibrant, robust economics that come out of California consistently. 80% of our economy is driven by employers of 100 employees or less. We're the largest small business on the planet, and 80% of our economy is driven by small business. And that is a resilient, highly adaptive set of stratums economically that we use in order to bob and weave with the economy as it occurs globally and nationally. And quite frankly, as much as we are left with desire for the previous administration in the past 4 years, it did have an effect on California. It did have an effect on quality of life. But we were able to get so much done still as a result of our own leadership and our own semi-independence to move forward as a state in the 5th largest economy, that we're able to really continue to maintain some level of dominance with this conversation in the United States. And now I think with Biden and Harris, especially with the vice president-elect, we're going to have a continuing and meaningful role on the global stage, where we have folks like John Kerry being able to recapture some of that leadership that we've had in the past, that will help to translate into great economics for innovation here in the state of California.
Tom, I'm going to jump in here. Thank you so much for those remarks and introducing the areas that you did. I want to circle back with Dan Riker and ask him, you've gone through a couple of transitions in the last few decades. Tell us about the timing of appointments. How long will it take to get people in place who can make decisions related to offshore wind?
So it's an interesting question. I actually went back and I found my transition folders from 08, 09. And actually, to give you an example, Energy Secretary Chu was actually confirmed on Inauguration Day in 2009, literally on January 20th. And there were members of the cabinet already confirmed prior to him. So we clearly will have announcements made about the key cabinet officials in the month of December, and we may have some confirmed in prior to the inauguration. The tricky thing, though, is we do have a Senate that's a lot more cantankerous than it was 8 years ago, or actually
12 years
12
ago.
years ago.
12
Yes.
years ago.
That was a long time
Whoops.
ago. So who knows? But I think I'm hopeful that there remains a sort of a moderate enough wing of the Republican Senate, if it doesn't switch hands as a result of Georgia, that we can get a few people in place in order to make these kinds of decisions. As I said, the key ones obviously are the Secretary of Defense, which is an absolutely critical cabinet position. Secretary of Interior, an important one, and all of the senior non-confirmed positions in the White House will all be in place. So I think we can get going. I talked to someone who's a candidate for the Secretary of Defense position yesterday, and she said to me, 6 or 8 weeks from now, there ought to be a team in place that can get going on this stuff and begin to look at this lease issue.
Thank you, Dan. Just a follow up on that. So recognizing the president-elect's ambitious climate goals, do you think the White House will ask DOD and DOI to find common ground on use conflicts off the Central California coast?
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Denny.
They
Okay,
will.
Denny's going to take this one.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, they will, and they will accelerate the process to find common ground. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is you talk about offshore wind in California, other places, and people envision from horizon to horizon wind turbines out there. When you think about the size of the operating area for the United States Navy, for example, right off the coast of California, it is huge. The amount of sea space that is required for 10 gigawatts, so I'll focus it down to the Morro Bay call area that BOEM has designated for, let's say, 3 to 4 gigawatts, is like a phone booth on a football field. It is not going to be covering the ocean with floating platforms and wind turbines. And it's especially important for people to realize that unlike terrestrial wind, where we see in many of the valleys ashore in California, the size of offshore wind turbines is getting bigger and bigger by the day. So I anticipate by the time we start putting steel in the water off of California, the standard size wind turbine generator will be 15 megawatts. That's one turbine, and you can do the math, divide 4 gigawatts by 15 megawatts, and it isn't a huge ocean area that is going to be required. That's important not just for military operations, but for other ocean users, especially fishermen. There is a fear, obviously, that somehow offshore wind is going to have a tremendously negative impact on the fishing industry. If you look to Europe, not the case. There's plenty of ocean out there. There are plenty of areas. And in fact, a case could be made that the wind farms can actually attract fish to certain areas that has the reef effect.
Admiral McGinn, I want to follow up on that, since you have actually lived in that and worked in that area and provided extraordinary leadership for the Navy in California. Can you tell us what are the actual military training and readiness activities that go on in the Central Coast in terms of aircraft navigation, communication, weapon system? Give our audience a picture of this and help us understand why you believe all of that is still can go on while offshore wind is developed.
I'll use an example from my aviation days. It's critically important that strike fighter pilots are able to coast in from the sea and hit a checkpoint at a precise time and a precise location ashore. There's one of these military training routes that's very close to the call area. It is quite easy, and based on my experience, to change the location or the angle of that type of aviation low-level coast-in training to be able to accommodate that and to avoid the wind turbine interference. I am absolutely convinced from a technical and an operational standpoint that this is doable, because it's not going to take thousands of square miles of ocean to get the 10 gigawatts of wind power that's waiting for us to seize off the coast of California.
Well, thank you. I want to circle back to Kelly Boyd here. Kelly, many state agencies, including the Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, CARB, and CAISO, are all going to be having a role in offshore wind. Tell us about the coordination that's required to make something like offshore wind come together, and maybe reference some of the work that was done on getting utility scale solar in the desert. I realize a different situation, but perhaps some relevance to what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think they're actually commensurate. The agencies do have to collaborate, cooperate. We've learned from prior experiences, and they have a integrated energy planning tool now that works from the Energy Commission to the PUC and then feeds into CAISO. The layer that is CARB now is really on the emission side, and one of the things that we're looking at and planning for resources like offshore wind is a lower overall million metric tons of carbon emissions. So setting that standard lower, and the lower that standard goes, right now we're at 46, that goes to 38, offshore wind becomes much more attractive. So the agencies do coordinate through those formal processes. I think any of us who are in California now and are working in those processes understand that they are rather bogged down. So what we did in 2009 through about 2011, when the ERA projects were, we had to get them online in a shorter period of time than we'd ever done, as we were siting transmission and doing interconnections. The governor at that time, first Governor Schwarzenegger and then Governor Brown, they set up a task force, and that task force brought the agencies together, and we worked project by project to get them all in place. I think that we need to do something similar now because of our economic situation, and they'll need to look at resources. They'll need to look at reliability, where resources can be located to be able to expedite all of this. So I think they're going to need to use the formal collaboration processes they have through their procedures. They are also going to have to be outside the box, working actively together with, by the way, local, state, federal. We worked with DOD. A lot of we were on federal lands for a lot of those projects and interconnections before. So they're going to have to do all of that again.
I want to go to Tom Soto now. You brought up the environmental justice case for offshore wind. Can you develop that a little more for our audience? Kind of how do you see that, the issues that affecting communities that have been overburdened by environmental factors, and tie this into the offshore wind opportunity if you can, Tom?
Well, I mean, the first and foremost, it's about economic opportunity. We should make sure that as we develop these resources, that we know that we have job training and equal access to that opportunity for communities that have long been overlooked, for one. Two, we know, for example, that a good portion of the United States lives within the coastal zone around the country, and all of them are not Huntington Beach. They are low income, they are diverse, they are impacted, and they're the ones that suffer the brunt of not only poor air pollution, but the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, soil erosion, and so forth. So there's a considerable effect. When you had Hurricane Sandy, it didn't affect the Upper East Side as much as it affected the low income areas around Brooklyn, the Bronx, and so forth. And so there's an immediate impact that occurs as a result of the impacts of climate change as we're moving further into the 21st century. And I believe that those communities get that entirely. And that's why there's so much support, for example, for offshore wind from the environmental justice community. So I think it's easy to tie. And then again, going back to the jobs aspect of it, there needs to be, a clear understanding that as we move forward with opportunities like this, and I think this is about as close to shovel ready as you could get. If we could get the right appointments and movement within the administration, this could be a key priority. And I think it's going to Governor Newsom to have him provide the big ask and the leadership necessary. But look at the alignment that we have, the amount of resources that we have from not just the great relationship that the state has with the president-elect, but with Senator Kamala Harris as the vice president-elect, and then the number of folks, having someone like Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who was head of intergovernmental, this Caesar's granddaughter, who's a longtime friend, but she is a great daughter of California, and I'm sure that she's going to be a great voice for environmental justice and projects like this. Hopefully we have folks like Mary Nichols going to EPA or some appointed position where she could advocate for such and so forth. But we also have to time it with the transitions that are occurring. Keep on talking about the forest fires and so forth. This is an era where remote transmission and remote generation is dying on the vine because of these reasons. And here we are with 200 million bark beetle dead trees that are just permanent fuel for fires in the future. And the alternative to it is going to be in-state generation. And part of that optionality has to be offshore wind.
Great, thank you there, Tom. So a number of questions have come in about the intersection with the fishing industry. And Admiral McGinn, you referred to that. You've flown over these waters. You've seen them. Can you tell us how you see it and what you know about some of the efforts that have been made on the East Coast to resolve these potential conflicts?
Yeah, I think it's really, really great to have the kind of meaningful dialogue to educate each of the stakeholders. The wind industry has to educate the fishing industry on exactly what an offshore wind farm is and what it is not in terms of shape, scale, size, etc. And it's important for the wind industry to understand what the concerns of the fishermen, because there's a lot of mitigation that can take place with that kind of educational dialogue between parties. And I really encourage that. And having worked with the industry over a number of years, I know that there's a great willingness to do that. We want to have stakeholders come out of this with a win-win outcome.
Thank you, Admiral. And then a question for Dan. A number of people have asked, so give us a sense of scale. How much offshore wind could be built in California? The NREL says there's 112 gigawatts of technical capacity off the shores of California. What part of that could actually be developed on what schedule?
So when I got started on this opportunity in California in 2014, I actually was amazed about the size of the resource. As you say, measured in the hundreds of gigawatts. But obviously what was standing in the way is we didn't have a technology to address the deep coastal waters. But along came these floating platforms, and now a great technological race going on among many companies developing them. So I think those are going to be available when we need them. The question you're asking is just how much that could be developed. There's a lot that could be developed technically. We're going to develop a lot less than that because there are constraints of all sorts. But the good news is this is measured in the tens of gigawatts of what I think can be effectively and appropriately developed. And tens of gigawatts in the California grid, particularly with the capacity factors we're going to see with offshore wind, particularly with what it can do to help firm up more variable resources on land. That's a serious contribution. And it also comes in on the western side of the grid, not the congested eastern side where we have all sorts of issues bringing in electricity from other states. This is coming in on the non-congested side. It's also coming on into the grid where populations are large. So it is closer to load. So for all sorts of reasons, I think there's tens of gigawatts. I think it's close to load. I think it's coming in on the right side. It's obviously low carbon, and it's going to help us firm up other things, to say nothing of addressing the sort of things we're seeing with these forest fires. So it's a great package.
There's a lot of
Kelly, just to
parallel
build on
lines,
that,
Adam.
and I'll come back to you, Admiral, in a
Sure.
second.
Yeah.
Tell us about the transmission side of this. In particular, what's the available capacity right now, especially after factoring in Diablo Canyon's plan to be closed down in 4 or 5 years?
So that's a trick question, but the actual capacity when Diablo is closed, and that's assuming that California addresses some of the congestion problems we have at Path 26. So being able to get power into LA Basin, San Diego, or moving from south into the valley. About 3 to 6 gigawatts. That's really what's going to be an improvement. The availability could stretch from 4 to about 8 or 10. But 3 to 6 is the max, all else being equal. The Diablo closing down and that line becoming accessible, we would have about 3 to 6 gigawatts.
And Admiral McGinn, you had a comment.
I was just going to say that going back to a comment Tom made a while back, there are a lot of parallel developments in terms of clean energy that are going on. He mentioned, I believe it was Silicon Beach. I think hydrogen is another area, green hydrogen. The ability to capture and store the energy that is being produced offshore, being produced terrestrially by solar and wind is really, really increasing. We're going to be going far beyond simply batteries to include pumped hydro and hydrogen, et cetera. So a big influx of clean energy offshore that we will bring over the next 10 to 15 years is absolutely critical.
Thank you. And Tom, you've been a participant in a number of campaigns over several decades for clean energy, including you and I worked together on the No on 23 effort back in 2010. Talk about the coalition that you think politically needs to be built to move offshore wind forward.
Well, a good example is the type of campaign we had on No on 23. Remember, we got the Pavley bill passed, got cap and trade in place, everybody poo-pooed it, and it actually worked and started to trade in the billions. And then the Western States Petroleum Association gathered enough signatures to qualify a referendum on that legislation, and that was No on 23. But we spent a considerable amount of money going into low-income diverse communities, and actually in those communities we got a 2-to-1 vote on No on 23, defeating WISPA. And it's a similar type of coalition. Listen, California is a diverse state. It's a labor state. And if you want to move things, you have to talk diversity and you have to talk labor and move forward with that agenda, or else it's not going to get the attention necessary in order to get the priority that is needed. And there's a considerable amount of, as the Admiral just said, it's not just offshore wind. I mean, and I know, Adam, that you look at this from a holistic point of view, but the amount of activity with respect to the CARB fleet rules, for example, is huge amounts of economic opportunity. What is it going to take to build out all of these hydrogen fueling facilities for the CARB zero truck rule, for example, or begin to use a lot of the CapEx fully amortized infrastructure that is owned by natural gas sectors that may not be delivering natural gas? Can we use it for storage and transportation of hydrogen? There's a lot of questions that we have to ask, but they're all going to be developed and answered by the types of economics and opportunities that are there. And it's interesting because of the pandemic and the economic situation. California, in the first time in years, has seen, I believe, a negative net outflow of population. But I don't think that's a standard behavior. I think California has a lot to offer, and we're going to continue to see the state and its population and its economics grow. And it's going to have to include, a diverse and inclusive base of support. It'll be interesting to see, for example, who Governor Newsom appoints to Senator Harris's seat. I think all of those candidates are very well qualified. All of them are going to deliver for California. You know, but again, we're going to have all of this alignment to get as much done as we possibly can in the next 4 years. And before I go off, I just want to make sure that we look at Georgia, because you can't underestimate all the prognosis that all of us and Dan have had here. The degree to which we could get as much done as possible is going to rely on capturing those 2 seats in Georgia, because there's a difference that the McConnell legacy has versus with them having the majority, the Republicans, versus what we could get through with a 51 vote. And Georgia is going to be key to a lot of this conversation, the velocity and the depth that we'll get as a result. So, you know, we all need to do what we can if we want to support offshore wind, to make sure that this administration has as much headroom in the Senate as they possibly could on the confirmation process, moving projects forward, and on stimulus. And that means getting out the vote in Georgia and making sure that we get those 2 Senate seats, thus Vice President Kamala Harris being the 51st vote.
Great.
Hey,
Thank you,
hey,
Tom.
Adam.
Dan,
Adam?
you're going to have to sign off momentarily. Do you have any last remarks? And I will do a quick run around our group here. But Dan.
No, I think this is an exciting opportunity, and I'm hopeful that as soon as the key Biden folks get into place and with a strong signal from Governor Newsom, we can actually get on with the lease sale and do it in 2021. I got to go give a talk on energy efficiency, the other linchpin to building a clean energy future. So thank you very much to all, and thanks, Adam, for putting this together. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan. And last thoughts from Admiral McGinn.
I think that, as I said, there is compatibility. It's just a matter of sitting down with the key stakeholders, especially the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy. We don't want to lean on key equities that they have, and vice versa. But I am absolutely convinced that we can do it if we have the right kind of dialogue and the right kind of attitude, if you will. Let us get to yes. Let's figure out not the reasons why we can't, but how we will be able to do this with great benefit to many, many stakeholders, energy-wise, economically, and certainly environmentally.
And Kelly Boyd, just 30 seconds if you have it.
Sure. Yeah, I just think we are at a very critical phase, and I have great hope we're going to be able to move this forward. The value of offshore wind is huge, and I think environmentally, economically, and absolutely from an environmental justice position, there's not a better resource out there that doesn't exist today in California. This is the one we need to bring in.
And Tom, 15 seconds on your side, and I've got a few closing thoughts.
Hey, man, I'm just with everybody. Let's just get this done, get this guy sworn in and move, because the opportunity is there. And let me tell you something, with the vaccines out, this whole economy and the recession is not for lack of liquidity. This is a disruption of economics because of the pandemic. And once this vaccine and confidence and leadership is there, you're going to see an unleashing of capital that will go to help support a lot of these activities, and the type of leadership that we have in Washington. Hopefully we capture the Senate. We can move this along very quickly.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thanks to all of our speakers for a lively and informative discussion, and to everyone in the audience who asked great questions. You can find recordings of this webinar and previous programs on our website. Lastly, I want to mention that Offshore Wind California is a trade group that offers membership for companies and organizations. You can find more information on our website, which is offshorewindca.org, or by sending us an email at info@offshorewindca.org. Until we meet again, stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the rest of your day and evening. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks very much.
Fair winds following seas.